Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast in association with the John Campea Show. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. The Designing Hollywood podcast show is dedicated to all things movies, the movie industry, and its talented professionals.
Hi, I'm Gilbert Musali, the new president and CEO of Western Costume, welcoming Designing Hollywood back to Western. You're at the biggest costume house in the U.S., the oldest costume house in the U.S. We've been around over 112 years now. We consider ourselves the one-stop shop for all your costuming needs here. With our two extra buildings next door, we're at roughly around 150,000 square feet. There are roughly 2.5 million costumes. If you need to get supplies, we can help you with that. If you need fabric, we can help you with that. Order fabric from around the world, anywhere you need. Deck out a full army if you want in our military department. Here's our supply store, catering to all your costuming needs. Thank you, Designing Hollywood, for coming in to see Western Costume. Hope to see you soon.
This episode is sponsored by the Western Costume Company. Today's guest is a costume designer, a 3-time CDG Award winner, most recently costume designed the pilot block of Apples Never Fall, starring Annette Bening and Sam Neill, and the feature film Old Dads, written, directed, and starring Bill Burr, which I actually watched twice. Having served 3 terms on the Costume Designers Guild Executive Board, he's extremely proud of the work he's done to help bring the costume design community together and currently serves on the Television Academy Peer Group Executive Committee. His first jobs include the television classic Moonlighting and Pee-wee's Playhouse. He was also a part of the team for Bugsy, which, by the way, has one of the greatest lines ever in Go Outside and Jerk Yourself a Soda. Best Costume Academy Award winner, City Slickers, Say Anything to Wong Fu, and Space Jam. In 1999, Michael Mann recognized his talent and promoted him to associate costume designer on The Insider, starring Al Pacino and, of course, Russell Crowe. He hasn't stopped designing since. The Anniversary Party with Gwyneth Paltrow and Kevin Kline, Showtime with Robert De Niro, and SWAT with Colin Farrell and Samuel L. Jackson followed. He served as costume designer on the Jennifer Aniston film Management and designed from sketch to fabric all of Miley Cyrus's Hannah Montana costumes for Hannah Montana the movie, from which dolls, Halloween costumes, and sportswear were created for the tween market. Without further ado, it is our great pleasure to welcome costume designer Christopher Lawrence to the Designing Hollywood show. Christopher, welcome. And I gotta say, I'm totally excited to speak with you because you have one of the most interesting and eclectic lists of credits I think we've ever come across here. So thanks for coming on the show, man.
Thank you very much. That's nice to hear.
Now, you know, we always start by asking, was costume design something you aspired to do? I feel like there's 2 tracks. People either fell into it, not realizing they wanted to be in it, or people were focused and sort of were moving in that direction throughout their careers. What brought you into the business of show?
Well, it's not a quick story, but I'll try to make it quick. I grew up in Los Angeles, and one of my sort of secrets, but not really that much of a secret, is I was on American Bandstand, and I danced for a number of years on that. And
okay, that's cool in itself.
And you didn't have to be a dancer. It was much more like Hairspray, or Grease, where the camera comes and everyone just shoves their face in the camera and all that. But it was a really fun introduction into the world of show business, as you said. So I wanted to do something. I knew I wanted to do something in that field. I went to college for communications. And one day, another bandstand person and I went around and put our applications into production companies. Weirdly, like a week later, I got a call and I started working for Merv Griffin and his production company like 2 weeks later.
Wow.
I was doing that part-time and going to school. At that time, Merv had the Merv Griffin Show, Dance Fever, Wheel of Fortune, and Entertainment Tonight. And I was a page that sat people in the audience. And then a couple of weeks later, they asked me if I wanted a full-time job. I was going to be driving for the company. and I had to quit school. So I liked school. My parents knew I liked school, so I asked them if I could leave because I was going to school to get a job in this industry, and I was being offered a job in the industry. So I did that. Became head of the shipping and receiving department and in charge of the distribution of the TV show Dance Fever. And I'm probably about 21 or 2.
Wow.
And the president says, "Hey, you're doing great. Your next move is vice president of sales." And I panicked and I quit. I did not want to be I didn't want to be like trying to get, Folgers to buy airtime on Dance Fever.
Right.
Which is what that meant. And it was so easy to get that job. Yeah, it was so easy to get that job. I thought, oh, well, that's how it works. And then, of course, I could not get another job. So a friend of mine had a connection at a boutique in Beverly Hills called Camp Beverly Hills. And I got a job there. And that's where I started working with, actors, costume designers, even a director. One of my clients was Candice Bergen, and she was married to a director named Louis Malle.
Yeah, of course.
And Camp Beverly Hills was half like trendy sportswear, but it also started with surplus clothing. And he was doing a movie, Alamo Bay. So he came in and started talking to me about the surplus stuff and talking about characters. And at first I thought it was just like I would be a personal assistant to somebody who needed clothes. And then I realized that there was this whole other narrative of creating a character through what they're wearing. Louis Malle showed me that. And then coincidentally, 2 different actors I worked with had costume designers that needed help. And they said, well, call my friend Christopher. He knows what looks good on me. He knows what I like. And it was the same designer. So then I talked to him. It took about a year for me to find the right fit of like, do I want to quit my job? Because I ended up becoming the manager of Camp Beverly Hills. I worked there for about 2 years. I gave myself like a year to get out and go into costumes because once I realized that's what I wanted to do. And the costume designer of Moonlighting was looking for an assistant. Back then, there was no such thing as a production assistant. I was just the assistant to the costume designer, literally filled his car up with gas, things like very menial things. But very quickly, he saw that I knew more than that. And I would start swatching fabrics and shopping and even kind of ghosting the set costumer so I could learn and get trained. And from there, I worked in a costume house, got into the union, all those things. And I never really thought about being a costume designer, but the costume designers I worked for all kept saying, you're going to be a costume designer. So in 1999, after working on a lot of great films that you mentioned, Michael Mann, I was working on a film with Michael Mann, and the director and he were not having a good time together. So eventually the 3 of us decided, well, really, I wasn't part of the decision. They decided that the designer could move on. I would sort of finish out the rest of the movie. And that's how I became an associate costume designer and thought, well, if ever there was a time to make the move, now's the time.
Well, that's amazing. Michael Mann, I mean, he doesn't get much better than that. But I have to ask you, like, at the beginning of your career, you worked on Big Top Pee-wee that was directed by Randall Kleiser, who also did things like Grease. Yeah. And then you worked with the legendary Blake Edwards on Switch with people like Jimmy Smits and Ellen Barkin, who's one of my favorite actresses. Yeah. When you first started, and then Bugsy, I mean, Bugsy, an amazing film. You're dealing with that movie, by the way, still kicks ass. That's one of those movies that whenever it comes on, you can't stop watching it. The performances, the clothes in that movie are amazing.
It won the Academy Award.
Oh my God! I mean, Annette Bening's dresses and everything. But you just, and then you work with Madonna, Uli Adele on Body of Evidence. I mean, and then Meryl Streep in The River Wild, to Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, Val Kilmer in The Saint, right? Yeah. I mean, before you even were bumped up, you had a really eclectic run in the 90s working with all these really interesting directors and actors. You really saw Tony Scott and Will Smith on Enemy of the State. What was that like for you? I mean, you really were getting a great overview of both the talent behind and in front of the camera. And that kind of an education is sort of invaluable. What were things that you were learning during this period about the business?
Yeah, I was really fortunate that I worked with costume designers that were very confident and weren't afraid of letting me sort of participate, really actively participate. Many of the costume designers I worked for would be doing multiple projects. So I would be left on a movie like the Meryl Streep movie, The River Wild. The costume designer did sort of the initial, like the fittings, and then I did the rest of the movie. So I was very fortunate to have this safety net where I was doing all of the, going to all the big meetings and being a part of all those big decisions, but it wasn't on me, Those
Right.
costume designers ultimately.
So you're just having fun.
It's all stressful,
Right.
but it's a dumb job for the amount of stress that it creates. But yeah, I just was very, very lucky to be in those rooms. And then for me, because I did not go to school for costume design, but the designer of Moonlighting and Pee-wee's Playhouse and Big Top Pee-wee and Beaches and all those things, he never bought anything that he liked how it fit, the color it was, or even what it initially looked like. So he was always rebuilding clothes, having me dye the clothes, So I was just learning and absorbing in those fitting rooms where all you're doing is taking notes, but I was really seeing how he transformed clothes or made clothes to the costumes that they became. I was very, very, very lucky to have that kind of education.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I was the seeing how different directors worked and how they interacted and how actors would build their characters. What were some of the things that you gleaned from, in terms of being a costume designer, navigating the waters between what a director might want, what an actor needs, and then interfacing with the director of photography and the production designer in terms of designing a color palette for the film? Was this exciting to you? Was it difficult? What are some of the things that you learned about collaborating with other members of the production team and actors as well?
Well, I had something there for a minute. I would say that I think the thing that I learned most from being in those rooms is, and it's such a life skill, and it doesn't really have to do anything with costumes, was listening.
Right.
Listening to what the director is saying, listening to what the actor's needs are, and then having that, being able to translate all that. And I think that's what I learned working for a designer. Sometimes you could see where a designer came in with their own agenda, which we all do.
Sure.
We still design the film even before we get the job because we have to present to the director what we think this movie would look like. So I saw how you have to really listen and pivot and not be married to any one concept. And even once you have the job and you're designing things, you talked about the collaboration with the production designer or the cinematographer. You have to be ready at any time to say, wow, that does not look good on that set. Or now they've changed the way it's lit and the colors have gone really mute. Like we need to change. So it's really about listening, being malleable, and being fast on your feet.
Yeah, I mean, and clearly, I can only imagine the education that you had working with all these different people. But you also work with directors who are known for their visual style, whether it was Michael Mann and Tony Scott and Michael Mann in particular are two directors that I think about in terms of clothing. I mean, obviously, going back to things like Crime Story and Miami Vice, Michael Mann had that. I mean, he was revolutionizing. I wanted to wear pastels and linen because of Miami Vice,
Yeah.
and I never thought that would happen. How did that work? Like for you, because you already were dressing people when you were working at Camp Beverly Hills, you kind of already had an idea of what all different kinds of people would look like in different kinds of fabrics and clothes and things like that. When you made the transition to full-on costume designer where you were calling the shots, how did your job change, if at all?
Yeah, well, it changes from project to project and director to director. It doesn't surprise me that you would think of Michael Mann, because I've never worked with a director like Michael Mann, and I feel fortunate enough. I'm one of the few people. I think Colleen Atwood and I are the only people who've done like 3 projects with Michael. So that's pretty good company. But Michael doesn't look at things like a normal person. He sees the entire frame, and I feel like he's looking at like each pixel of the frame. It's unusual for costume designers to go on all the scouts. With the production designer
Wow.
and cinematographer and the director, they go on all the scouts and they look at everything. And it's pretty impossible for the costume designer to do that. But if you can't do that, he dictates everything that he is thinking and seeing and saying. So when he's at a location and he likes the color of the leaves in the background, that comes back to me saying he wants that color in the costumes. And that's a really incredible way to work. I work much more instinctively, seeing the clothes on the person. I've seen hopefully I've seen the sets and the atmosphere, but he breaks it down so specifically that it's a really unusual way to work. But that's why his movies look like they do. I can immediately think of, in The Insider, Russell Crowe is in a room with this big mural behind him. So then we just put him in that off-white shirt, so he's just punches out in front of that mural. Or the color of the leaves I'm talking about, Rip Torn is in an office with the leaves behind him, and his shirt is the same color as the leaves. And it's wonderful and really rewarding to work in that way. It's very difficult. He is not an easy person to work for, but it's because his standard is so high.
He created a show, it doesn't get spoken of, that you worked on much, which is Robbery Homicide Division. It starred Tom Sizemore. I love that show. And I think, it was when peak television was starting. It was one of those shows that kind of fell through the cracks. It didn't last long. I wish it continued. But again, that was a high standard as far as television was concerned. And I would assume he brought some of that same acumen to a show like that, because I always thought of Robbery Homicide Division as Heat, the TV series.
Sure.
I mean, because it kind of dealt with Al Pacino's division, which was Robbery Homicide, and I mean, they never said that. They never called it Heat, the TV show, because Heat itself was based on a previous TV movie that Michael Mann had made called L.A. Takedown, and it was a remake, almost to the point of having the same dialogue. But I really loved Robbery Homicide Division, and I know that there was multiple costume designers on that. But just for my own edification, was that fun to work on? Did you like that show?
I mean, it's hard. It's fun is an hard word.
I guess that would not be the right word.
They're all. I think the thing that people don't know about costume design and the film industry is it's really hard work. So, fun isn't usually part of it, but rewarding, sure, yeah, definitely. The best part about the job is that we get to meet people and go into situations that we would never be in as a regular person. So one funny thing that I learned on that is I went on a ride along with the cops, and we went overnight riding through the streets of LA, and it was me and the director, who was Stephen Gyllenhaal. And Stephen Gyllenhaal, they had to take out insurance on us in case
Oh my God.
we were shot or killed, or and the difference between what they had to pay for me and what they had to pay for the director was very eye-opening. My word.
Wow.
Yeah. But every time you work with Michael, you learn. And I had done, The Insider, and again, I had sort of taken over it, so I hadn't been really in those early stages of developing the characters. But I learned from doing the TV series with him. He said the way you create indelible TV characters is by repetition. So, he wanted to keep the people in basically the same looks, the same color palette.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. The cops, the detectives were all in white shirts because he wanted to have a very strong visual recall for an audience.
Wow.
And I've kept that in my artillery ever since.
That's that I never would have. See, I learned something new every day myself.
Yeah.
that's fascinating. Now, one of the things I also think is fascinating about your career is one of the first films you did as a full-fledged production costume designer was you worked on the anniversary party that was actually directed by two directors, two actors.
Yeah.
You know, of course, one of them was Jennifer Jason Leigh and the other was Alan Cumming. What was that like, you know, jumping into the fray and having two different directors that came from the acting side?
Yeah, it was great. You know, I had previously had worked with Alan on another film, not quite as good, called The Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas.
Yes.
Which was a great, you know.
But it had to be fun. That had to have been fun.
That was fun. It was so incredibly creative. I was the costume supervisor on that. That was the last time I was a costume supervisor. I did it right after The Insider because that designer had given me my start. So it was kind of a nice sort of button to that part of my life. So Alan had asked me to do that film, and you know, it was a little overwhelming because it's Jennifer Jason Leigh and Gwyneth Paltrow and Kevin Kline and Parker Posey and Jennifer Beals and John C. Reilly. I mean, it was crazy.
Amazing.
But everybody in that movie was friends. So it was they had all worked together before. So it was a really low key, like, let's just put on a show kind of film. It was the first film on digital video. So it was a learning curve working with the cinematographer, John Bailey, on that, seeing what patterns and prints and things work on digital media. But the idea of working with two different directors, I've done that a few times. I did that on Crank.
Well, right, that's right.
Neveldine and Taylor. And you have to know, it's sort of like mom and dad, you know, you kind of find the sweet spot where they're both agreeing. Alan and Jennifer agreed much more than Neveldine and Taylor. But, you just kind of know where it sharpens your communication skills. And you just have to know who to approach with what. The fact that Alan and Jennifer were also in the film was great because Jennifer, you know, was finding her way. She said something so interesting to me because I think she is one of our most talented actresses. I have loved her since, like Tra La La in Last Exit to Brooklyn.
Yep.
And she said to me, she never had realized what costume designers could do for an actor, which shocked me. But the reason she found that out working with me is because we could keep trying clothes on. Usually an actor comes in, they do their fitting, and then they could be shooting the next day. You know, it's not really as collaborative as it should be.
Right.
But when I'm working with her, like, you know, months before we start shooting, then we can say, hey, you know, let's revisit this costume. And as she's writing and tweaking, you know, things are happening in her brain that, you know, she feels like maybe she wants to be more vulnerable and have more skin showing. So we could continue the conversation for probably about 6 weeks. And that was extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, and I actually really like that movie a lot. I saw that movie in the theater, and just because of who was involved, and I thought it was really interesting. Now, you know, you and really well acted, by the way. You've also worked on big action movies, like we talked about Enemy of the State for Tony Scott. You worked on like SWAT, which, I mean, as a kid growing up in the 70s, SWAT was like the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
And to see that movie. Now, when you're working on films that require stunt work, action set pieces, does that change your approach, or is it essentially the same? Because you have to make more multiples, and you have to think about stunt performers.
And, you know, every project has its specific thing. So with something like SWAT, what's interesting is you have to know the movie you're making. And Neil Moritz, who produced that, you know, who did all the Fast and Furious movies, you know, so commercially successful that when you get a Colin Farrell and LL Cool J and Michelle Rodriguez, you're not really creating characters now. He wants those people to look like LL Cool J and Colin Farrell and Sam Jackson.
Right.
You know, so that's one thing to learn, is just that, like, okay, this is the brand that they're selling. And then with your supporting characters is when you can really tell more of a tale, but they're very much broad strokes. Obviously the multiples are a situation, you know, you have to find sometimes you need 10 or 15 or 20 of things. And I would say also you just have to pay attention to this seems like a no-brainer, but like what are you supposed to be looking at? I also did a movie called Cellular with Chris Evans and Kim Basinger and William H. Macy and Jason Statham. And, that was a very chaotic movie where it all took place in one day, and he's running through all kinds of crowds and things, much like Jason Statham in Crank. And so I don't normally wear or use like a bright red shirt on film, but I thought, if we want the audience to always be able to find Chris in the frame,
sure,
let's put him in this bright color where he'll always catch the eye. So you have to think about little things like that.
That's I never thought about that, but yeah, see, these lessons are they might be hard fought lessons to learn, but once you know them, invaluable. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about working on The Hottie and the Naughty. Paris Hilton. Here at the height of her powers, there you were.
That's sort of heartbreaking to me. I don't know if it's a good movie. I haven't seen it since it came out. It was a wonderful script, and I have to say, I was like everybody else. I was kind of a Paris hater. I read the script, really liked it, really, really, really enjoyed meeting the director, and so I was kind of in. And Paris was the kindest, most polite, lovely person to work with. I think she was invested in being famous for something more than just being Paris Hilton. She had an acting coach. Like, she was great. So yeah, I had a good time working on that movie. That might have been one of the ones that was fun.
Wow, that's good to hear. Now, the same year, 2008, you worked on a film that I love, that I think is criminally underseen. It's a horror film. It's criminally underseen, called The Midnight Meat Train. Yeah. Co-written by Clive Barker, based on one of his short stories in the Books of Blood. I'm a huge Clive Barker fan. Bradley Cooper gives a great performance, and it was directed by Kitamura, the director, Japanese director, who is not really well known in the United States. I think that movie is a banger, and I think as a horror film, I mean, it drips with atmosphere, and I just wondered, just because the creatives that were involved, and then you had, it was one of Bradley Cooper's earliest roles where he's playing a leading man. Clearly, you can tell. It's pre-Limitless. You can tell that he's a leading man.
You definitely could see that there too on the day.
Oh, totally. What was it like? That was kind of a departure for you, delving into. That film, that goes to a lot of dark places, and it's bloody, it's unflinching, and I really adore that movie. And I don't think that the horror community, not many people have seen it.
Yeah, and the story is that Clive Barker and the people who were distributing the movie ended up having a big fight. And so their commitment was they had to release it to 100 theaters. So they just kind of dumped it in like the 99-cent theaters. So it really didn't get its due. People who are horror fans, and if you're a horror fan, then you're a Clive Barker fan. It's considered like the horror fans' horror movie. It's a great movie. For me, when you talked about my eclectic resume, I always wanted to read the script, even when I was just going to be like a set costumer on the job. And when I read that script, you want to find something. As I've said, we work hard. We spend a lot of time. So I saw that script as about loyalty. It's been a while since I did it and saw it, but the Vinnie Jones character, he has a job to do and he does it, and it's about loyalty and serving the greater good, what his greater good is,
right,
unflinchingly. And
that's interesting.
So I thought it was kind of cool, and I know Clive Barker is cool and Hellraiser is cool and all that. So that's why I was in. We didn't really know who Bradley Cooper was, or Leslie Bibb, who has just been on Palm Royale, and is also a wonderful actress.
Yeah.
and Yuhei Kitamura is this amazing Japanese director, very visual. So yeah, I was in, and it was a great experience breaking down Bradley's character and having his clothes kind of unravel and the colors kind of get more acidy and strange as his world is getting strange.
Yeah.
It was cool. And it was nothing beats walking through a subway car full of dead hanging cadavers on an early morning to get your day started.
No, and it really captured what it was like to read. I mean, when the Books of Blood came out in the 80s, they were really transcendent, transgressive. I'd never quite read anything like that. It made me a lifelong Clive Barker fan. And I thought that movie, maybe more than any other Clive Barker movie, captured the mood and what it feels like to read his work, if that makes any sense.
Cool.
Thought you guys killed that. And then, after that, I have to say, you did a short film. You did the Punisher Dirty Laundry short with Phil Joanno. And Phil Joanno, who, when I was at USC, everyone looked at him as one of the heroes because he made 3 O'Clock High, which is one of the most criminally underseen teen films of the 80s. It's brilliant. And then he did the U2 concert film Rattle and Hum. And what an interesting project. How did you get involved in doing a short? I mean, Thomas Jane, again, coming back, playing the Punisher, he was awesome. Yeah. But how did that come about for you?
Well, it's funny that you say, you knew of him from USC. Phil and I went to the same high school.
Really? Yeah, because he was like a hero back in the day. Like, I want to be like Phil Joanno because I love 3 O'Clock High so much, and it's so stylish. And
so the same held true at my high school. Phil's 1 year ahead of me, so we didn't know each other in high school. I knew his sister, but he does a lot of commercials, and I also do a lot of commercials. That's what I've won my CDG awards for, commercials. And so one of his like regular stylist wasn't available, and she introduced me to him, and so I worked on a lot of commercials. She stopped designing, so I took over. And one of the things we did was this short. Yeah. It was cool. We shot it in maybe 2 days.
Wow.
Ron Perlman is also in it.
Yeah.
And Tom
it's really good.
Yeah. It's a cool movie or a cool short.
Yeah. I was always curious because, I know a lot of people that are making shorts and things, like they're always trying to get the most talented people involved. And so I was curious, how did you get involved in that?
Yeah.
And then you went and worked on one of my favorite shows too, like Robbery Homicide Division, although it did better, is Ray Donovan. I loved Ray Donovan. I mean, again, kind of this LA neo-noir, really, really great show. What was it like working on a series like that? And what is the difference between working on a long-running series as opposed to working on a film? What are some of the challenges that you don't have on a motion picture?
Yeah, well, I had, when I first started on TV shows, I was, so low on the totem pole, and coming into Ray Donovan, I was punched in the gut. The amount of work a TV show, that's an hour long, no commercials show, and a film is an hour and a half, and you've got months and months. So we were doing an hour long film every 10 days.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That was, quite the learning curve for me. Is how do you shoot a job? The costume designer should always be on location, on set when a costume is being filmed for the first time, in case you want to change it, or the director or the actor want to change it. So you're managing that, but then you have to be going to production meetings and fittings for the episode that's going to shoot in 4 days.
Right.
Well, that hamster wheel is crazy. And Ray Donovan was not rough. It was, as far as like the story, it usually took place 1 or 2 days, in an episode. So I didn't have lots and lots of costumes for the leads. I don't know how people do it when they have, 15 changes in an hour, And then the other challenging thing is you're shooting episode 2, but you don't know what's going to happen in episode 3. So So you like at one point I put my actress in something in episode 2, and then found out in episode 3 that she's still wearing it, and there's going to be a stunt, and so now you have to like hopefully you can still get the multiples for that change. I feel like I'm shrinking a little. Yeah, so you have to pivot again, and hope that you can still find the multiples for the costume that you established in the previous episode.
Right.
Other than that, I did it for 3 seasons, and it's really great to have that experience of like you're in school, you take the summer off, you come back, and there's all your old friends,
Right.
and you really do become a family working on a series.
Yeah,
And
that's a great show, and again with all the different eclectic characters and things you were able to do. I mean, it's that's another show that had a very stylish cast, slick look to it. Well, that brings me to you've had 2 pretty high profile things most recently. Old Dads, Bill Burr, I believe it's his directorial debut.
It was.
And I have to say I liked that movie. Going in, I was like, but I liked that movie a lot more than I expected to like it when I watched it. I watched it more than once, and I thought it was fascinating to you have a comedian who you think about stand up, and Bill Burr did a few things, like he was in an episode of The Mandalorian, and he was incredible in that episode. And I've always liked Bill Burr as a comedian. I liked him in his appearances on talk shows and things like that. What was it like to work for somebody like that as a writer-director directing a first movie?
Yeah. Well, I was certainly familiar with this comedy, which is, very in your face, and and so I thought, oh, okay, well, what's this going to be like? The producer was Monica Levinson, who I've worked with many times. She brought me in, and I mean, he was this funny, lovely, kind guy, and I at one point I said to him, when is the shoe going to drop? When do I see like angry yelling Bill Burr? And he's like, oh, no, my need to be liked is much higher than my need to get my way. That was hilarious. And you know what, he never yelled on set, even though he never yelled as a director. And there were a couple of things in Old Dads that I thought were maybe not great things to say politically, or
for sure. But for sure,
I mean, that's his whole brand,
and that's kind of what the movie definitely delved into that in a funny way.
Yeah, but what's the amazing thing about Bill is the producer had said to me, well, if there's something you don't like, tell him, talk to him about it. And I did talk to him about a particular sequence, and he was like, I gave him my own suggestions, and he liked my suggestions, and he changed it. So he made a scene that was maybe, on the fence, on the line of being too far, too much, and he dialed it back a little bit. And
that's cool. That was
great. And he told me I was his phone a friend. So when the people came after him for something, at least in my lane, I could be his phone a friend, and I had blessed it.
Well, I'm curious, like in a movie like that, what is the difference when you're working on a comedy? Bill Burr, I've never thought of him as being some kind of a clothes horse. You see him in T-shirts and on talk shows. But is there a difference between? I mean, you worked on Pee-wee's Playhouse and Big Top Pee-wee for Paul Rubens, and obviously clothes was so much a part of his comedic persona. Yeah. What is the difference when you're working on a comedy as opposed to, say, an action film or a horror film? Or is there a difference?
I think the real trick in comedy is that, there's the temptation to go for the sight gag. Like you can make there's something that's funny, and then you can push it over the top depending on how you dress somebody. And Bill we did have some sort of over the top characters. So he wanted to make sure that they were not dressed for the sight gag.
Right.
So Bob Cannavale, even though he's like trying to be like a tragic hipster, although he's too old to be a hipster, I wasn't allowed to do like anything too dumb or ridiculous on him. I did put him in overalls. At one point, he looks like he's in a boy band, which was hilarious. But Bill was nervous to do too much of that, so we really didn't do that too often, so that the comedy itself could feel a little more truthful or honest.
Right.
And I think that's the challenge of comedy, is to not do that. I did a movie called Bubble Boy with Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yes.
And there we were a little more sight gaggy and funny, and that's fun because you can just use your imagination and sort of go for broke in making something stupid. And I think in Old Dad, since you saw it twice, Bobby Cannavale's performance is stupid, which I've told him, like that's the highest compliment. He's such a dumb character.
Yeah.
But if I had dressed him stupid, then it wouldn't have worked.
Totally agree. And it's interesting because I always feel he's kind of like an MVP player. Whenever he's in something, I don't think people think of him. I think he's an incredibly versatile actor, and I think whatever he's in, he always makes it work. He's and he throws himself into, like, to me, I don't think he is afraid of being a stupid character. He'll make it work. I mean, I really enjoy him as a performer, and I liked him in the movie a lot. I thought he was good. And I mean, the movie does gets to the point where it's borderline offensive, but I miss that.
My mother-in-law, I told her she did not have, was kind of like saying don't see it, and she had a rough time. The first 20 minutes is probably the most offensive, but she hung in there, and she said she actually really, really liked it.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was, it's not Apocalypse Now or Gone with the Wind or something like that, but it's fun. Yeah. I liked it. It made me laugh, and that's what a comedy is supposed to do. Now, your latest project has you re-teaming with Annette Bening from Bugsy. Apples Never Fall, which is a mystery series, I guess we would call that. Familial mysteries. And Sam Neill, another one of my favorite actors, a man who almost played James Bond. I love Sam Neill, and I love it. I love Annette Bening, and coming off a Naiad and doing this. Tell us about how you got involved with Apples Never Fall, and what was that process like, getting involved with that, and where do you, when you're brought something like this, do you get to see, are all the scripts written when you first get involved, or do you have to wait and find out?
Well, I mean, that's different again on everything. Like when I first started Ray Donovan, we had, I think, 4 scripts out of 10. Apples Never Falls based on a book by the woman who wrote Big Little Lies. And so we did have, I think we had almost, I didn't have the last 2 scripts. But we knew where the story was going because the book already existed.
Right.
Ray
Okay.
Donovan
Yeah.
Was not based on anything. But how I got involved, you had mentioned in the introduction that I'm, really proud of my work with the Costume Designers Guild.
Yes.
And something I'm really proud of is how often another costume designer has recommended me to one of their directors, or like the Phil Joanno situation. The costume designer that they had wanted wasn't available. The one they had history with.
Wow. Okay.
And she suggested 2 people. And, I luckily was the person who won and got to do the job. And it was really great to be reunited with Annette. That was, again, kind of a full circle thing.
Yeah.
That was nice. She's amazing. She wasn't really sure. And I did the pilot block. It's very common that one designer will come do the pilot and then another designer will take over. So Ned wasn't really sure who this character was at first. So I went to West Palm Beach. It takes place in West Palm Beach. I went there because you think what the look is, but once you go there, you're always surprised at something you see. So I went there. I was taking a lot of stealth photos from my phone of people, and then I could send her. I was sending her in real time, like pictures of the ladies of West Palm Beach. And then she was like, "Oh, okay, I get it. Like I see it." And then I got a text from her saying that she had been shopping at Chico's. which is not a store that Annette Bening would normally go to. But she got inspired by the photos, and then together we could build the character.
That's amazing. Now, when you're working on a show, I mean, like you said, you did the pilot block, but you still have to like tee it up. So,
Yeah.
and it does have a central, I think, mystery, questions that are asked. When you're thinking about a character's journey through a story like this, is there a closed journey as well? Like you talked about how in Midnight Meat Train, how Bradley Cooper's clothing unraveled as his world unraveled. So, that's a very interesting concept for me. That had never occurred to me. Is that the same when you're dealing with the mystery, or when you're dealing with? Do you take people on if things get darker or lighter? Is that something you're consciously aware of as a designer?
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to know, like, what is the mood of the scene and who is the focus of the scene. Sam Neill's character, who was a coach, it's about a tennis family.
Yeah.
And he is the one who's sort of the one who is the most likely person who may or may not have done in his wife. So he's pretty aggressively dressed, but still a coach. He wears a Fila jacket that I found. And he's really about branding and being a coach. And the one thing I saw when I was doing my research, all the coaches I saw all had this like little silver chain, which it's funny how like just something like that clicks for an actor. I don't know that the audience ever even paid attention to it, but it's just some like touchstone thing for him. And we did put him in more aggressive colors because he's pissed that why do people think he killed his wife? What an awful thing to be accused of. And yeah, he's not a great guy. He's not a great dad, probably not even a great husband, but doesn't mean he killed somebody.
Right.
And then the kids all have their progression, again, with doing just the first part, you kind of want to hit hard who these people are. And then costume designer Allison Fanger, amazing costume designer, she took it over and then, then takes the sort of nugget that I've started and makes it hopefully even better, which she did. And yeah, you do kind of follow those people through their emotional journey, whether they're at one point, Allison Bree's character puts on a sweater that was her mom's, so you want that to have meaning, have that sweater have meaning, things like that. It's great with families too. A lot of times it's nice when a character, I did a movie called Texas Killing Fields, which was a Michael Mann production.
Yep.
And there was a missing daughter and the mom starts wearing the daughter's clothes. Like it's nice when you have a family and you can start kind of overlapping the costumes.
No, I mean, I have not watched this yet, and it's something just because of the cast alone, it's so hard to catch up with all this, especially it's the shows. There's so much good stuff on streaming and it seems like something is starting every week, and which it is. Yeah. I feel
like all my friends are talking about now that they just make lists because there's so many things you forget. I mean, I hate to say it, that you sometimes forget a show you're really enjoying, but there's just so much you forget to get back to it.
Yeah, I mean, House of the Dragon starts, I think, this week, the season 2 of that. Can't miss. Talk about clothes. Can't miss that. Well, listen, we always ask people, what advice do you have for people that are up and coming? And like you said, I like your story of how I like the circuitous routes to get into the business. But now, I mean, with social media and Instagram and Pinterest and all the kinds of things people get involved with, what are some things you could tell people? The one thing about costume design is AI is never going to be able to replace a good costume designer because it's a physical. I mean, I know everyone, but you still have to act. You still have to dress an actor. It's never going to go away
until the actors are AI.
Well, I hope
hopefully they are securing that position.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, I don't know if people are going to want to watch. I mean, I think one of the psychological reasons people watch movies is because they know it's actually human beings.
Yeah.
And I from a psychological standpoint, watching something that's AI generated is just a different form of animation.
Yeah, and so much of what we do is subliminal. So I don't know when you would put in those keywords into the program, I don't know that you would get what a human will bring to it. The surprise.
Yeah, and I think that at least I hope so. But that said, what advice might you give to people that are interested in doing costume design or any kind of design work for motion pictures or television?
I think the best thing to do is always just keep learning and keep your eyes and ears open. I would not have my job if I wasn't paying attention and going after anything that was in front of me. Whether it was before I was a costume designer, and every costume designer I came across, I said, "Hey, do you need help? Do you need an assistant? I don't want to say relentless, but I was enthusiastic." And then when I became a costumer, I reached out to costume designers and said, "Hey, I just finished this job and I'm available." Like, it was, a big coup for them that I was available. But, if you believe in yourself or you believe the story you're telling, then other people will too. And then I took that into my costume design as well. You really have to think about the psychology of the characters and make sure you're telling an honest and true story.
Right.
And then I go to every costume design panel. I listen to all the podcasts. You learn things from every person if you're paying attention, if you're still open to learning. And my craft gets better and better by hearing someone like Julie Weiss say, make sure you're not always going back to the same crayons. Like we all have sort of like a foundation of characters, or what a bookworm looks like, or and like if you've done it, like get rid of it. And working in commercials, a lot of times it's like, just do the easy read, what's expected. So in my film and television work, I know what that is. And then I say, okay, what is so far away from that will be a surprise and will also be an interesting take on a character.
Right.
Because we've all seen that, that if it's expected in my brain, it's probably expected in your brain also.
Sure.
Let's do something different.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's great. Great advice. So what do you have? Do you have anything you can talk about coming up?
I do have something pretty exciting, but I have actually been told I'm not allowed to talk about it.
Right.
One time I do some moderating on panels and things like that. And I was moderating a panel with Ruth Carter on it, and she was doing Black Panther, but she couldn't talk about it.
Right.
But yeah, I have a couple of great, I have a really wonderful character thing coming up. And then with the same director, I have like his foray into a little bit of a not quite horror, but it will definitely let me flex that muscle of unraveling clothing and telling a dark story in a really cool visual way.
Nice. Yeah, I interviewed Ruth for this show, and yes, she's amazing. Yeah. I just feel bad for her because she was working on something that just lost its director the other day. Wow. And, something that's been, I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but she would have been the perfect. I mean, I'm dying to see what she would have done with this particular project. And because she's just incredibly talented.
Yeah, she's one of our best, that's for sure.
Yeah, I love her. Well, what about Instagram? Are you on social media? Can people find you on...
Sure. I'm on Instagram. I am at the Christopher Lawrence.
And would you interact with people if they ask questions?
Of course. Yeah, there was a page that was, or an Instagram account that was all about Ray Donovan. So I certainly talked to them. There's a podcast now about Moonlighting, which they've asked me to talk about. I don't really feel that I could really say that much about doing the costumes on Moonlighting, because I was really, very, very small spoke in that wheel. But recently also somebody reached out looking for sketches for Moonlighting, and I knew where he could find those. I think most of us are pretty happy to connect in that way with people who are interested in our work. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I think more than ever, it's so great to. I think one of the great byproducts of the pandemic, if there is one, is the fact that everybody got used to talking on podcasts or doing
Yeah.
stuff online, and now people are much more open to it. Celebrities have started their own podcasts, and it's really interesting to see all this information get out there, and there's people that are really interested in it. Hence, I think I've been doing this show now for 3 years. Which
Yeah,
has
and a
been,
big tribute to Designing Hollywood is there were a number of sort of costume design podcasts that started, but I think you guys are the ones that are still here.
well, it's it's a lot of fun. I mean, I've learned so much being on this show, and it's been a real thrill for me. Like I said, just the stuff that you've worked on. It's amazing to talk to people that, because I have a huge film collection, and I feel we kind of live in the post-cinema age. Cinema was the art form of the 20th century, and as we move into more video games, and people have all become the stars of their own narratives, whether they're playing video games or making TikTok videos and things like that. I hope we don't lose the art of cinema, because it means so much to me. But it's interesting to live in a world where we used to look outward, but now everybody is making themselves the central character in whatever narrative they choose to engage in.
It's a little heartbreaking for us when, like, my sister-in-law was staying with me and was watching Queen Charlotte, I think, on her phone. No, it was on her iPad.
Yeah.
But still, I was like, oh my God, what a costume designer goes through to like find the trim on the ribbon of the corset on the, we think about everything being, big screen, and then you watch it on this teeny tiny little screen, you miss half of it.
Well, the flip side though is like you can get beautiful OLED 65-inch, 77-inch, and 83-inch sets and tweak them if you have them calibrated properly. You can see everything.
Yeah.
As Patrick Stewart said on Extras, you could see everything.
Yeah.
But it's great now because we're seeing the work being represented. I mean, I'm with you. How can you watch something on a phone when you can have a great surround? Even if you just have a sound bar, you can have great surround sound, and you can have a beautifully clear screen that is bright, and you can see everything. But yeah, watching stuff, I can only imagine like, no. I mean, here we have the technology to see the textures in the fabrics better than ever.
And I would say as artists, we are always striving to give you the best visual experience you can on that 75-inch screen or at an IMAX theater.
Right.
But I think the producers are wanting to give us the money that, assuming it's just going to be looked at on a phone.
Yeah, which is too bad, because like I've been trying to explain to people, seeing a movie in a theater, there's an element of being in a sensory deprivation tank. You're in a black big box. There's nothing in your peripheral vision, hopefully, if someone's not munching and popcorn in your.
Yeah.
But I think it penetrates your psyche more. I mean, I've got no research to back this up, but when you're watching a movie in a theater, not just the communal experience, but having it on a 40-foot wide screen and hearing it in surround sound, and not your mind is only focused on what you're watching, and it makes the experience much deeper. And I think people have forgotten about that. They're just so.
I was going to say, during the pandemic, you were so used to now like the phone and the this outside stimulation that I made myself. I just watched mostly shows with subtitles, so that I couldn't look around and I couldn't look at my phone.
Wow.
I had to watch the show or the film, and it was great.
Yeah.
I mean, like on Shogun, you have the option to watch like a dubbed version. I'm like, no, I want to be like engaged and committed to like having to stare at the screen.
Yeah, I totally agree. Great show, by the way. I love Shogun.
Extraordinary costumes.
Oh my God. I mean, I was a huge fan of the original, but the costumes in this were unbelievable. I mean, just amazing. And who would have thought they shot that in Vancouver? I mean,
incredible.
Really incredible.
The designer's name is Carlos Rosario.
Carlos Rosario. He'll be here. I expect great things from him in the future.
Yes.
So, well, listen, Mr. Lawrence, thank you so much for being on the Designing Hollywood show. It was so great to have you. And again, I'm such a huge fan. Christopher Lawrence, everybody should look up his work. And thank you very much for being here on the Designing Hollywood show.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
A special thank you to founder and executive producer Martika Ibarra, co-founder, costume designer, the legendary Marilyn Vance, and of course, John Campea from the John Campea Show. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in to the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts. I am, of course, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and you can find me on Instagram at rmburnett, or find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or on YouTube at Post Geek Singularity. Thanks very much. Like, subscribe, and give us your comments. What would you like to see on the channel? Right down below. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Designing Hollywood.